It's very clear, almost from day one, that the Soviet Union was deeply concerned about its image abroad, and by abroad they meant inside the United States. So in that sense, the Soviet Jewry movement was a major player, if you will, as part of a larger picture of getting Americans to understand what the Soviet system was about. And the Soviet Union's leaders, with many ups and downs along the road, were concerned about what that image would be. For example, immigration rose in the years leading up to the Olympics in 1980 because they were concerned about what would be the image of the Soviet Union as the Olympics approached. Immigration declined radically after the Soviet Union entered into Afghanistan. President Carter then said, this is the greatest threat to world peace since World War II. I'm not exactly sure about his history at that point, but he was making a major statement that what the Soviet Union did in Afghanistan is a black mark on its record. Immigration immediately plummets. So in that sense, the overall contours is that the Soviet Union appears as very sensitive to the ups and downs of its image inside the United States. At the same time, and I think this is Lisa's point earlier, or her suggested point, is that no glasnost, no Gorbachev, no thawing of the Soviet Union as a whole, no Soviet Jewish success. In other words, it really needs to be seen as, yes, we had a Soviet Jewish movement that was there from day one, continued to be there, was persistent and relentless in pushing its point of view. But the Soviet Union also had to undergo enormous internal change before it could be ready to say, let the Jews go. If for no other reason, and we've seen this in the 20 years since of post-Soviet history, if for no other reason because the Soviet Union was concerned about what impact Soviet Jewish immigration would have on other ethnic minorities inside the Soviet Union. In other words, they were concerned not about just 2 million Jews. They were concerned about the breakup of the Soviet Empire as a whole. Gorbachev's contribution to this, and I don't think he's the most popular man in the Soviet Union today, but he was the one who recognized, as you just pointed out, the Soviet Union had lost. It needed to undergo enormous change. Change with respect to the Jews was one major component of that overall glasnost and perestroika.
If I could just add one small point, I think what I always like to say is it's not, I don't think we can say that the Soviet Jewry movement brought down the Soviet Union. But I think we can say that the Soviet Jewry movement helped shape the way that the Soviet Union fell apart. And by that I mean, if we look at a place like China, it's clear to us that it's not a foregone conclusion that you can't reform economically, open up economically, and still maintain an iron grip on your people, still be a totalitarian country. The Soviet Union could have changed its economics. It could have moved away from the planned economic system that it had, and still been the country that it was in terms of the way it treated its citizens and its immigration policy and all these other things. But the Soviet Jewry movement, among the other kind of democracy and human rights movements, was the element that did not allow it to do that. That meant that once the domino fell, if you will, the whole thing was going to, once the thread was pulled, for a different metaphor, the whole thing was going to unravel. All the different elements.